for everybody. Thanks for joining us. So Ms. Kuik was a two-term nominated member of parliament. I didn't know her personally. I only met her last week, and we had a very lovely conversation that hopefully today it will be the same again. Okay, so let's get right to it, right? So Ms. Kuik, as a two-term nominated member of parliament, right? Would you agree with me that the nominated member of parliament scheme is essentially an undemocratic scheme, and in many ways, right, it is a very elitist scheme, right? It's a bunch of elites choosing another bunch of elites to represent the commoners, right? So what would be a good justification for having the NMP scheme, and what is the value add of the scheme?
Okay, there's a lot in there to unpack. But maybe first let's start off with it's an NMP and undemocratic institution. I think that opens up a really great question of actually what do we think is democracy, right? So if our idea of democracy is about, you're voting in a representative, then we're not voted in lah. So that, but that's looking at one dimension of it. But I do think it's an important dimension. And you're right, there's a lot of opacity, maybe, in the way NMPs get into, like what is the process of them getting in? I mean, frankly, like I didn't even know what was the process that the NMPs get in until like someone come and ask me like, hey, you want to send in your name or not? So yeah, I do think the NMP institution can have more legitimacy if maybe the process in which they are nominated in, right, is maybe more transparent, more participative. I think the arts community has done a good job in like trying to make up a more participative process to nominate their own like representative. So I do think short of like, asking parliament or the government to like change the way you do the NMP thing, I mean, the arts community has proved that you can own self do lah, so we could do that. I think that might help the legitimacy of the institution. But that's just looking at the are you elected or not elected aspect of democracy, you see. I mean, the other aspect of democracy is, democracy essentially is about power beginning with the people, right? That it's rule of the people versus rule of the elite, if you look at the classic definition of it. So if you are an NMP and you garner the position, right, and you're not elected in, I mean, how do you democratize the position? You have to own self decide, like, let me use this position or use this institution to speak for the people's interests lah. And I take it as there's certain people's interests that are maybe more overrepresented because there's so many people in the house already representing those perspectives.
Right.
Then the NMP can decide to bring up people's perspectives that maybe are not as represented. So that's my take on it. I'm also realizing that as I speak to you, like more and more Singlish is coming out.
It's okay. I think it's a largely Singaporean audience, if not exclusively, so it's fine. So on that, I think I do agree with you. I think there's value to that, and that's the system we have, right? We have a one dominant party system, or dominant one party system, and therefore, while the NMP may be undemocratic in the sense that it's unelected, it can actually add to democracy because NMPs are not bounded by party rules, right? Like even the opposition, they cannot say a lot of things, right? Because like individual opposition MPs may want to say something, but they cannot say something because they are bounded by the party whip or party rules. But NMPs are not. And I think people like yourself, people like NMP Viswa have, Professor Walter Tessera have made substantial contributions. But what about the elitist part? Would you say that the NMP scheme can become an elitist scheme?
It can be if okay, so it's like all democratic processes, right? If we don't participate in it, or we don't think about how to make use of it, then yes, it can become like another elitist thing, lah, if you want to put it that way. But I think one of the things that people don't realize about the NMP thing, and I didn't realize it either until I talked to an ex-NMP, you can nominate yourself.
Right.
Like that also can, so yes, technically, any one of us, regular folk, regular voters, if we care very badly about being in parliament, yeah, technically you can submit submit an application, and then get all the letters and whatever,
Right.
submit, and then of course the committee has to let you in, lah,
Right.
But and I think well, I guess that is a gatekeeper of elites, if you would like, but you can try, and and what was interesting is it was an ex-NMP who told me that's what she did. So no one scouted for her. She applied herself, but she was a scientist. So maybe maybe people decided like, okay, let's let in a scientist lah.
Right.
So yeah, there is a gatekeeping aspect that we don't see lah.
Right.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it's what the NMPs make of it that determines its impact on democracy.
Yes, I think I would frankly, I would love to hear from many of the ex-NMPs, like what the heck they made out of their time in the institution.
Right.
Because when you are put in there, I think a lot of people don't understand that you're put in there as an individual, and nobody gives you a 10-year series to tell you how to be an NMP. You just sort of like, well, at least for me, I didn't know what I had signed up for.
Right.
I like, okay, let's do this. And then when you're in there, I was like thinking of very existential questions of what am I doing here? Like, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to speak about? And I think those were very important questions to ask myself. And I am curious actually on what other NMPs made of that. Like did they ask themselves these things as well? Yeah, but I was very bothered by it because I really didn't know what I was supposed to be doing in there. Yeah, exactly. You kind of know, but yet you also don't know.
You mean procedurally or what?
No. I mean the
Existentially.
Existentially, yeah, politically,
Okay.
but like, like, are you supposed, what are you supposed to speak up for? Because you look at the other MPs in the room, and a lot of them speak up for their residents,
Right.
right? And if you're not an NMP who was put in there, let's say by the arts community, or like the union, usually sends an NMP in there, then technically you don't have a base,
Right.
you don't
A
have
constituency. Right.
you don't have a
Right.
constituency. Yeah, so I had to, I was put in there because I was supposed to represent what the youth sector, but what does that even mean? And yeah, so I had to make a lot of sense out of it. But when I was in that position, I saw how some VWOs on the outside were using the institution in a good way, and I think in a fruitful way. And you saw that play out more, I think, in this in like NMP Walter and peers like Batch, right?
Right.
Yeah. So what I realized was, while I'm sitting there trying to figure out what to do, there was only like maybe a small handful of VWOs out on the outside, or organizations on the outside, who were actively writing to me every session with like, here's what we are interested in, here's what if you are interested to talk about this, then we can show you our research, or we can talk about these are the questions that we are interested in. And that to me was a godsend, because like the NMPs get to ask like 5 parliamentary questions, right? And you kind of don't know what to spend your quota on if no one's giving you information. Yeah. So I found those VWOs super useful, especially those who backed it up with research. Yeah, and then they send you the research to take a look at. So that was great. And I think that's an example of how the people can use this institution for the people's interests.
Okay. So that's an excellent point. So I think for those who are listening, we should write to the NMPs more.
Yes,
And
please do.
yes, should write to the NMPs more. And if writing to our MPs don't work, we can do both. We can do both. Write to our MPs and the NMPs as well. So do elected MPs take you seriously? And what's the vibe you get from them when you see them during lunch? Do you guys discuss policies, or do they say, "Hey, why do you say that?" Or is there any indication that your speeches are heeded or are at least taken seriously and considered?
Okay. Maybe that says a lot. Okay, so seriously, the first, do the MPs take NMP seriously? And did they take me seriously? The answer is I don't know. Yeah, I don't know because I didn't have those conversations with them, and I don't know because I think that's an excellent question though to ask your MPs. Right? I mean, if you're interested from an institutional point of view, like not so much are they interested in this particular person, but I mean, but I think that's a great question to ask the elected members of parliament. What do you think of what these NMPs say, especially if they bring up points of view that are quite different or quite divergent? Like, do you take them seriously? And if not, then I think that there's a huge conversation to be asked down there. So I actually don't know.
Right. Yeah. So I think we should ask that of our MPs as well. And also it's about the institution, right? Because we need to ask our MPs that in order to assess the efficacy of the NMP as an institution, right? So I think I'll definitely, the next time I see my own MP, I'll ask him that. And there was a question, are there other countries with nominated members of parliament? Or there are, for instance, Kenya has a nominated senator to represent the youths and persons of disability. And another question, the next batch of NMPs have not been chosen, so you guys can nominate yourself, as Ms. Kuik has said. So now, moving on to the broader point of MPs, what is the role of MPs? Not just NMPs, but MPs in general. Because because you are supposed to reflect and follow public opinion, right? But at the same time, as people in such a position of privilege, are you supposed to shape and lead public opinion and so on?
Okay, that's a really good question. And I think, the short answer is it's both, right? And I suspect I'm going to be saying it's both quite a lot throughout this interview. Because this question of should an MP be just reflect the public's opinion, or should it shape the public's opinion, is like what do you call that? It's like a false dichotomy, right? You're like trying to make it binary, but it's not. You have to do both. And this is also tied up to the other false dichotomy that we see floating around a lot about, like, is an MP a manager of an estate, or is he a leader, a thought leader of a community, or a thought leader of a country even, right? Because the leader of a country is not just the prime minister. The leader of the country is whoever is like in charge of like making laws, right? Which is like all of us sitting in there. So, and this again ties up to another false dichotomy about, so is an MP's work all about deeds, or is it about words, right? Because the work of shaping public opinion, the work of leading thoughts for a country or a community has a lot to do with the work of words, right? Not just the work of actions and deeds. And the thing is, these are not opposed to each other. They sound like they're opposed to each other, but they're not. They are complementary and they are needed. So I do see that the role of an MP is actually a very difficult one, right? Where you have to be both really good at just reflecting the public's opinion, regardless of where you stand on it, simply because it's your constituents' point of view. And yet you also have to put your own point of view out there and shape public opinion, because that's what people also want. Because that is the role of leadership, right? A manager of an estate right, has to do a lot of deeds, a lot of actions, a lot of let's take care of the things, and your job in there is not to question or challenge the boundaries of a system, if you want to put it that way, but to do the best work possible, working with what you have. But the role of leadership is to do that work of theory, abstraction, and you're sort of like examining ideas, and that does require you to question, to talk about, or even challenge the boundaries of things. And a great MP, I think, has to balance both, which is a really tall order.
Right.
It's a really, really tall order. And that's why, to me personally, I cannot imagine doing this work part-time. Simply because it's such a crazy job description. It's a damn difficult work. Yeah. So yeah, I find if you have to do both, then yeah, you would need to invest full time on it. Yeah.
Right. So would you say for NMPs then because you do not have the manager aspect to your job, right? So essentially NMPs by default are thought leaders, right?
We should lah.
Yeah, we should be theoretically, right?
Theoretically, it's like, you've been nominated in there to represent some interest, and you still keep your full-time job. You have a little stipend given to you by Parliament. Like, if you don't go in there and shape thoughts or share thoughts in a constructive way, then it's a bit like, what are you doing there?
Right.
Because you don't have an estate to manage. Yeah.
Right. So I like the challenging of the dichotomy between words and deeds, because I find it strange as well when people say you shouldn't judge MPs by what they say but by what they do. When speaking is a part of their job scope, speaking in Parliament is an important part of so that it just seems a strange dichotomy there. And thanks for bringing that up. So would NMPs be in a better position than to be thought leaders than MPs actually, since you guys are not bounded by parties?
Yeah, in that sense, I mean, I guess there's a bit more room for independence, a lot more room maybe to express what you think. But I mean, what's really interesting is, I mean, now this is making me think of like one of the very early tea sessions to welcome all the NMPs that we went through, right? And I think it was one of the ministers who told us, like, when you're in here, you're not here just to express your individual point of view. You're here to express the collective interest as well. And I think that's a good reminder. But again, there's another dichotomy there, right? That actually the best way to express the collective interest is to also share your individual point of view and your individual interest, and you sort of have to show up there lah. Yeah. So it's
what is the collective interest? What is the collective interest? Because there are different groups which have different interests, right? So what did he or she mean by collective interest?
I suspect what the minister meant by collective interest is Singapore. That means the whole country's interest lah. Yeah. But I think as a parliamentarian, the ability to see levels of the systems, I think, would be very helpful lah. Because yes, there's you, the individual, and you have a point of view that is legit because you are part of the system and you embody many identities, right, that link you to different communities. So you also want to express those community points of view, right? And they are also collectives within the collective. And then, of course, you got to talk about the national point of view. Right. And then you want to give yourself even more headache, then you talk about the global or regional point of view at the same time. And that is why that position is so challenging. Technically, we haven't even gotten into the perspective that an MP also has a role to play in talking about regional or global. And of course, this is like lagi even more difficult lah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that. That was very comprehensive. So on GE 2020, and you interact with a lot of young people in in your work and in your line, right? And you were a representative of the youth at one point in time. So do you see a difference in how the young voted or talked about voting or talked about the election versus the older people or the older voters?
Yeah. Oh, there's just so much to unpack there. Okay, so I think first I think we need to be aware that for young people, there's obviously a range of political inclinations of young people. I mean that there are those who veer more establishment and conservative, and there are those which are more liberal leaning, right? But I do think there is some pattern, right? I do think there's some cultural pattern that they kind of fall into. So what I thought was unusual about this election on social media as opposed to before, is there were a lot more sort of open expressions of like, I used to vote this way, but now I am voting this way, and this is why. And then they will break it down, and you get a sense that the breaking down of like why I am switching allegiances or why I am deciding that this style of politics is not for me, and putting it there in public and quite candidly and using their own names, it gives me a sense that there is a new generation that is not afraid to talk about such things, right? I think for like I'm Gen X, and I think for like Gen X and older, maybe there was a lot more hesitance in expressing ourselves about what we think and what we feel. But I think this gen, which has grown up on social media, they're like quite like indoctrinated in the like, my opinion matters. Let me share it with you, even though it's just an opinion about my cat, and then like, everybody clap for you.
Right,
There's some sense
right,
of like validation in like, your point of view matters lah. I mean, it's a silly point, but I do think it has an impact, on like, yeah, it has an impact on political discourse. So the same desires that they had for regular social media etiquette, if you like, carries over to the political etiquette, because you don't see any difference. Like, if someone posts on Facebook, you kind of hold them to the same standards that you hold your friend lah. So it's like if you're like a politician posts on Facebook like a takedown, of someone else, right? Then you are like, oh, what's this?
Right.
Or you see like a social media war happening between two people online who are older than you, and you'll be like, wow, why are they behaving like my brother? Yeah. So I do think that there is I don't know what's the best word for it, but almost a healthy what I can't think of a better word, like a healthy naiveness about like about questioning, as in questioning why do we talk like that?
Right.
Is this okay or not?
Right.
And not feeling this baggage of it's wrong to question it, which I think is refreshing. Yeah.
Right. I never made that connection. No, I always felt like this validation culture was entirely negative. This desire to seek validation. I never thought about how it carried into the political sphere in terms of affecting voter behavior. So thanks for that. So now moving on to civil society, right? And you have been active in civil society. So there's always a conundrum or a bind that civil society organizations find themselves in. On one hand, they if they try to work within the system, they will get things done, but they entrench the system. They contribute to the entrenchment of the system. On the other hand, if they challenge the boundaries, probably they are going to suffer some punitive action, or depending on how much they challenge the boundaries. So what should civil society organizations or individuals do? What should activists do? Hello? Yes. Yeah.
Should activists do? Oh my gosh. I think then
Yeah,
the
I'm here. I'm here.
I
I'm
have
here. Yeah. Yes.
hello. Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, I think I think our system, okay, first let me get this out of the way. Okay, like I think our system does have to show a lot more appreciation for the work of activists, and not make it like a dirty word.
All right.
And apparently it's not a dirty word because like if we can say PAP activists and not see
All
it as
right.
a bad thing, then it's not a bad thing to be an activist in other spheres.
All right.
Um, but I think yeah, I think for the role of the activist or how the activist can play the game, it's not terribly different from what I said about MPs actually. I mean, arguably MPs are a kind of activists, right? Yeah, activists for Punggol,
Right.
or
Right.
activists for Sengkang, right? So it's similar. It's similar. So this idea of should an activist work within the boundaries that have been prescribed to him or her, or should they work? Should they challenge the boundaries? And the answer is both. Again, it's very annoying, but it really is both. Um, because it sounds opposing, but it's complementary. So the wisdom comes from reading the situation, or I suppose, or reading the player that you're up against, lah. Like so there's going to be and the authority language, or the authority to speak about the boundary, to move the boundary, to investigate the boundaries of it. The authority to do that is based on the authority of what are the deeds that you have done, lah. So it can't just be words activism, it
Right.
has to be deed activism. And I do think
Right.
there are a lot of long-standing activists who have been doing both, right? And think we we have to I suppose appreciate can be a very triggering word for somebody. So we have to appreciate that part of the role of an activist is not just to manage the problem as it is, but it's also to take the leadership. And leadership is essentially about working at the boundaries, with the boundary, through the boundary, and the question of boundary, right? And an
Right.
activist has to do that, and that becomes very uncomfortable because nobody likes their boundaries challenged, right?
Right.
It's deeply uncomfortable, and I don't mean the government or the politicians or the leaders. I mean anyone who like anyone who's involved in, okay, let's just take, like, let's say the conservative activist who, let's say, wants to lobby for banning of abortion, right? And that sort of is their democratic right to challenge that boundary and
Right.
to question it and to hope to move it. But of course, they're going to trigger an immense discomfort in everybody because boundaries are not just political boundaries, they are representative of communities, psychological and emotional boundaries as well. And I think an activist who is wise needs to be very wary of what you are doing. You're not just challenging a political boundary, you're challenging people's psychological and emotional boundaries as well.
Right.
Which is why boundary work needs to be done very carefully, with a lot of discernment and a lot of intention with what words you are using, because it's sensitive territory. It has
Right.
to be done. It has to be done.
Right.
Right? Because that's how we grow as a community. But we will only grow if we getting better and better skill at just standing at the very uncomfortable boundary, asking people to please take a look. Please take a look.
Right.
Like, is this the right place to lay that boundary or not? Yeah,
Right.
rather than like bulldoze through lah, then people are
Right.
like, walao.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah, and don't be shocked when people see, that's the thing. If you bulldoze through and break the boundaries, right, without preparing people for what you're about to do, then the pushback is extremely violent. That they will like sort of like reject you
Right.
very fast. So it's very psychologically intense work, I think. And those of us who are maybe younger or budding activists, if you want to do that work well, then I think it's good to sort of understand the psychology of human behavior and societal behaviors so that you can do the work well. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I think that's an excellent point about boundaries having a psychological and emotional dimension to it as well, which I think a lot of people do not. Maybe they realize, but they do not have the wisdom to navigate it. But I want to push you a little on what you said about the deeds and words, right? Why, as an activist, do I need to prove myself in the realm of deeds before I can challenge the boundaries through words? Why is that? Isn't it a right of a citizen to challenge boundaries through words and not just, what's the motivation for this? Because a lot of times when you ask ministers certain things, right, certain uncomfortable things, and then they bring you to another. They ask, do you volunteer? Yeah. Do you volunteer in some other realm that So I'm thinking, is that a fair ask of a person when he or she is talking about something else, and you are talking about volunteering in some other realm? That you are basically shifting the goalpost or shifting the terrain from an uncomfortable battle to something that is within your own domain. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean the immediate thing that comes to mind is, and if you do have those deeds to back it up,
right,
you can say,
I agree
actually,
with you.
I do.
Right,
And
right,
actually, the whole of last year, I
right,
worked with 400 migrant workers, and
right,
out of the 400, 80% of me told me that this is an issue.
right,
Now, then
right.
it's
Okay.
like that. Then the person who's that. Okay, so when I talk about this, like through opposing concept things, right? We all have a bias, you see. So let's say the person
Yeah.
who's biased more towards deeds, he kind of needs that from you,
Right.
He needs you to sort of meet him where he is, which is, I need to see your deeds first before I pay attention to your words. Then okay lah,
Right.
here are my deeds. Now you
Right.
see my deeds. Okay, now can you hear my words or not?
Right.
You know?
Right. Right.
And,
Okay.
and actually, very similarly, those of us who are, let's say, biased towards words, you kind of need the person to give you the words first. Don't show me your deeds. I want to see your words as well. Yeah. So
Right.
so we all have a bias, and I think it's good politics or good activism or just generally good communication to work with people where they are.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And cover all bases. Okay. I fair enough. I buy that. I think that's a good explanation. So I think we only have about 7 more minutes.
Oh no.
So I'm not sure. Yeah. It's been a fun conversation. So cancel culture.
Oh my God.
I do not want to mention names because I don't want to have
Okay,
any
great.
lawsuits. Yes. But let's talk about cancel culture in general, I think.
Okay.
And it's not just in Singapore, I think elsewhere as well.
Yes.
This is thrown about a lot. So what are your thoughts on this? Is it really a problem? Is there such a thing as people being cancelled too much, or people to the point that they are afraid to articulate their actual views because of political correctness and being afraid of being cancelled?
Okay. Well, because we only have 7 minutes,
Yes.
I'm just going to be very blunt about this. Okay. So I think it's not very productive to talk about this issue using the term cancel culture, because it's just so bloody loaded, right? That people will
Right.
I don't know, they'll bring in all kinds of like other America stuff into it, and I think it's cleaner to not use that term and just talk about like what are we doing here, which is basically a lot of like if I don't like what this person says, I don't like what this person does, then I am going to take this person down, and it's and this whole cancel culture thing is using, so I'm going to look at it from an emotional and psychological lens. Okay, so cancel culture is essentially about using shame, right? Using the weapon of shame as and shame is an incredibly powerful weapon because what's at stake here is social acceptance. So if I use shame, I am sort of like weaponizing that, and the threat here is social rejection or social disconnection, and we most of us normal people like are damn scared of that. Even the most thick-skinned person will actually feel a lot of pain when masses or hundreds or thousands of people are all like, I reject you, I'm going to make sure all your whatever brands and all that reject you also, and it's so the reason why a lot of people like using it is because it's very emotionally satisfying to use it. But it is a very but it's not a sustainable, and I will argue it's not an effective weapon, not as much as we think, right? So there's a couple of reasons, right? The first is that from a psychological perspective, right, everybody needs a platform of self-worth to stand on so that they can change. And if we are hoping for the individual to change, or we're hoping for that pattern of behavior to change, or we're hoping for society to change, right, then shame takes away that opportunity, because shame burns down that platform of self-worth, right? The distinction between shame and guilt, right, is shame is essentially grounded in the you are wrong or I am wrong. It's a very identity-based emotion. But guilt is about actions, like I did something wrong, I said something wrong, right? So when you see, like, when you use shame on someone, shame corrodes the part of you that believes you can change, right? So if I am a mistake, if I am a liar, if I am like the devil's spawn or whatever it is that you're trying to shame me into believing about myself from an identity level, that means you're not separating my identity from my actions. It's not like, wow, you did something wrong, you are wrong, you very shame. So if you do that to me, so two outcomes will happen. Either I get really so shamed and broken and I cannot change because I'm so bad already, I might as well continue being bad, right? Or the other reaction is the aggressive, okay lah, you say like that of me, then like that lor, what can I do? What can I do? I am this way, right? So it sort of takes away that possibility of change, right? And the second reason you don't want to use shame is that there's this phenomenon called secondary shame. That means when you watch someone being publicly shamed, there's a lot of audience watching and they go, die, I also don't want to be in that position. So they all like diam, right? They all like quiet, right? And so it actually results in a lot more silencing, because people don't want to be humiliated. So they keep back their points of view a lot more. And you don't want that in a democracy, right? And the third, and I think the most triggering one, right? And this is from the voice of an activist from the 70s, okay? The triggering quote is, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, right? That means you cannot use the same tools of oppression to take out the oppressor, right? Because the horrible thing is once you do that, you become the oppressor.
Right.
So shame changes doesn't just change the target, it changes you, right? So that's why I think it's good to not use canceling or shaming as the tactic, right? What you want to do is use accountability, and that's different. Accountability is not as fun. It takes a lot more time, it takes a lot more work, but it's about preserving your dignity as the accuser or whatever. But it's also about preserving the dignity of the accused, right? So if you're on the side of social justice, or you're on the side of let's have reform, then you got to do the damn hard work of accountability lah. I got to keep you accountable, but not as fun as shame lah. Shame is fun.
Right.
Then why a lot of people like it.
What about repeat offenders, right? Do they really not deserve to be shamed if after a few times of holding them accountable, but still nothing happens, and they have a lot of they have a lot of sway in society, for instance, or there's a segment of people who listen to them? Wouldn't there be some room for publicly shaming the action, not the person?
Well, you can't really shame the action, you see.
I
so
see.
that's it.
I
Yeah.
see.
So shame is identity. So what? Okay. So guilt is a more fruitful emotion to use than shame, if you would like.
Right.
Because at least in guilt there is, holding someone accountable is basically asking them to take a look at what they're guilty of.
Right.
And I think that is fair. It's also very uncomfortable for you and the other person. but
Right.
it's a lot more productive in the long
Okay.
run. Yeah, because shame weaponizes lah. So if someone is a repeat offender and they're quite horrible, right? You shame them, right? They're going to become worse.
Right. Right.
So they'll become even more monstrous lah,
Right.
which is the last thing
Right.
you want, you see.
And they're
Yeah.
gonna play martyr, right?
They will,
So
yeah.
right, yeah. So would free speech be the antidote to hate speech instead of shaming or cancelling?
I think more intentional speech. Yeah, not so much free speech for freedom's sake, but more intentional, clear, and kind speech would be damn powerful.
Okay.
It's actually very difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, to
Okay.
ensure that every word has intent to be clear and kind.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that. So we are almost out of time. So there are two questions from the audience that one of them I'll just answer. Is the process considered non-partisan if elected members get to pick who to nominate as NMP? Well, it's not non-partisan, but on the select committee, there's usually one opposition member. But obviously, it is very much a partisan process. But ultimately, as what Ms. Kuik said, it's up to the NMPs to decide how democratic they want the institution to be. The second question, and we'll end with this. And usually, if elected politicians are on or party members are on, I will not ask them softball questions. But NMPs are different. There's no need to be competitive with NMPs. So somebody asked, what was your proudest moment during your parliamentary term?
Oh my God. My proudest moment. I have no idea what is my proudest moment in there. I can tell you many moments where I was like pretty scared.
Okay, which moments made you scared?
Every speech that I make that I know is not exactly like a fun speech or like can say something that potentially pushes someone's boundary. Like I said, it's psychologically scary to speak your truth or the truth that you see into the room, knowing that not everyone's going to agree with it. It's uncomfortable lah. So I suppose maybe the moments that I'm proud of is like when I say it anyway, and
Right.
and I know I am most scared when I don't dare look at the other side of the room. Some of my speeches, I deliver them looking at the gallery like, oh, help me. You look friendly.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
but that's more about me. So I have no idea what they are projecting on the other side.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So the more uncomfortable you make people make, the prouder you are, right? Because that's
in retrospect.
Right.
In retrospect. In that moment, I'm not thinking, wow, I'm so good.
Right. Of course. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say?
No. Well, let's see. If I only have like a couple of things to say, since we touched on cancel culture and politics and all that, I would just end off with like the 3 general rules of thumb that I always give people when I teach them about how to communicate, right? First of all, number 1, you got to meet people where they are, not where you wish them to be, right? Meet people where they are, and where they are is usually how they feel. So don't engage with facts first. Engage with feelings and sincerity and care, even if you disagree with them. Because once you can build that bridge of trust, then you have built a nicer ground for you to start to talk about the facts, right? Of where you agree and disagree and all that. Right. Second tip, right? Don't be nice, right? You're not going to get anywhere by being nice, right? But what you want to be is to be kind. And being kind is not the same as being nice. You want to be clear about the truth that you see, and yet you want to be kind and speak that truth with love. The harder the truth you want to say, then the deeper the love you better be prepared to give, right? Because that's the only thing that can make the bitter medicine like a bit better, right? And third pro tip is that you can be so right that you end up being wrong. So never enter into a conversation with your objective like, I need to prove that I'm right, right? Sometimes you are so right that you can be wrong, right? So just remember, in all contentious debate, you are not here to be right, you are here to get it right, right? You are not here to be right, you're here to get it right. Yeah, and if you can remember that, you can move the boundaries a little bit easier. Yeah.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So I came here for political talk, but I got some life wisdom as well. So thank you very much, Miss Kuik, and I'm sure the audience would agree with me that this was a thoroughly enjoyable conversation. We exceeded the time, but it's fine. It's fine. So thank you so much, and I hope to see you around as well. And I'll be uploading this
Sure.
to IGTV. Okay. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.